I didn't stay because I was afraid. I stayed because nothing felt wrong enough to go. I stayed because he was never cruel. That sentence lived in my chest for a long time, like a shield, like an explanation I could hand to myself whenever the doubt grew too loud. He never raised his voice, never slammed doors, never made me feel afraid. He didn't disappear for days. He didn't lie, not in any obvious way. He showed up when he said he would, paid attention when I spoke. From the outside, it looked safe, soft even, and for a while, I mistook that for love. In the beginning, there was comfort in how ordinary it all felt. No fireworks, no dizzy highs, just a quiet presence beside me. He would sit close, not touching, but near enough that I could feel the warmth of his arm through the air between us. He listened more than he spoke, nodded at the right moments, asked gentle questions. I remember thinking, this is what mature love looks like. I had grown tired of chaos, of intensity that burned bright and then vanished, so his calm felt like rest. He never hurt me, at least not in ways I'd been taught to recognize. So I stayed. I stayed because when I reached for his hand, he didn't pull away. He just didn't squeeze back. I told myself that wasn't important. I stayed because he never told me I was too much. He just never asked for more. I told myself that meant he accepted me. I stayed because he didn't argue, didn't fight, didn't make scenes. Even when something inside me wanted to scream, he stayed quiet. And somehow, that made my own feelings feel unreasonable. I began to soften my edges around him. Not because he asked me to, but because silence has a way of teaching you what not to say. When I talked about my day, he listened, but his eyes didn't light up. They didn't follow the shape of my words. He absorbed them politely, like background noise you don't mind having on. I noticed it. Of course I did. But I also noticed how gentle he was, how steady, how nothing ever felt wrong enough to justify leaving. So I waited. I waited for the moment when his hand would linger, for the day he'd look at me and see me fully without me having to explain myself into exhaustion. I waited for warmth to grow. Waiting became a habit, then a lifestyle. I learned how to fill the spaces he left untouched. I told myself stories in my own head, just to feel something move. When he forgot to ask how I was really doing, I answered the question for him internally. When he didn't notice my sadness, I learned to carry it quietly. He wasn't unkind. He just wasn't reaching. And I told myself that love didn't have to be loud, didn't have to be expressive, didn't have to look like anything I had seen before. Maybe this was just a different language, so I translated myself into something simpler, something easier to hold. I stopped pausing mid-sentence to see if he was following. I stopped sharing the thoughts that felt too fragile to land without care. I became low maintenance in ways no one ever asked you to become. Not because he demanded it, but because nothing invited me to be more. There were moments, small ones, when hope would rise again. Like when he brushed past me in the kitchen and his fingers grazed my back. Accidental, brief. My chest would tighten just a little. Or when he smiled at something I said. Not wide, not deep, but enough to make me think. Maybe next time. I lived in that maybe. I learned how to stretch it, how to make it last weeks, months. I told myself that real love was patient, that intimacy grew slowly, that I was lucky to have something so calm. People around me said things like, "At least he's good to you." And I nodded. Because how do you explain the ache of something that never actually breaks? How do you justify leaving a room that isn't hurting you, but also isn't holding you? At night, lying beside him, I would feel the weight of my own thoughts press heavier than his presence. He slept easily. I stayed awake, replaying conversations, searching for warmth that might have been there, but went unnoticed. Sometimes I turned toward him, hoping he'd feel it, that he'd instinctively pull me closer. Sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't. And I learned not to measure love by consistency. I learned to be grateful for scraps of closeness because they felt better than nothing. I stayed because leaving felt dramatic, unnecessary, ungrateful. What would I even say? He was kind. He just didn't love me loudly enough. That didn't sound like a real reason. Not to the world, not even to myself. So I stayed. I stayed because hope is quiet too. And it can sound a lot like patience if you listen from far enough away. And somewhere along the way, I stopped asking when things would change. I just learned how to wait without asking why. It didn't happen all at once. There was no moment where I could point and say, that's when I disappeared. It was slower than that, soft enough to go unnoticed. I was still there. I just took up less space. I stopped waiting for him to notice the small changes in my voice, the way my sentences shortened when I was tired, the way my laughter became more careful, like I didn't want to disturb the air between us. At first, I told myself I was just growing, becoming calmer, more secure. But security doesn't feel like shrinking. I started choosing my words with more intention, not because he was harsh, but because he was neutral. When someone reacts strongly, you learn their boundaries quickly. When someone reacts barely at all, you learn to guess. So I guessed. I learned which stories would get a nod, which feelings would be met with a soft, distracted, yeah, which silences were easier than explanations. I began editing myself in real time. I would feel something rise in my chest, a need, a question, a sadness that wanted to be held, and then I'd swallow it, not because he told me to, but because I already knew how it would land, gently and nowhere. I told myself that love didn't need to witness everything, that some things could stay mine. But over time, more and more things stayed mine. I stopped reaching for his attention in obvious ways. I stopped leaning into him when I felt small. I stopped asking if he noticed when something felt off. It felt easier to manage myself than to ask him to meet me. I became good at that. Too good. I learned how to soothe my own disappointment before it showed. How to smile through moments that felt incomplete. How to tell myself, it's fine, until my body believed it. There were days when I felt invisible in the quietest way, not unseen, just unheld. We would sit together, close but separate, two people sharing time, not wait. He would talk about his day, I would listen. I always listened. And when it was my turn, I noticed how often I softened the edges of my truth, how I turned longing into casual updates, how I translated emotion into information. I didn't want to overwhelm him. I didn't want to ask for something he didn't know how to give. So I became easier. I became the version of myself that didn't ask to be met in the middle. I started noticing my reflection in small moments, in the bathroom mirror, brushing my teeth beside him, in the way I'd pause before speaking, even when we were alone. I looked fine, but something about my eyes felt quieter than before. I missed the way I used to talk without measuring, the way I used to take up emotional space without apologizing for it. But I told myself that relationships are about compromise, about learning each other. And maybe this was just me learning him. I learned how to love without expectation. Or at least, that's what I called it. What it really was loving without asking. I stopped hoping he'd notice the way I'd dress a little nicer on certain days. Stopped hoping he'd hear the question behind my jokes. I stopped hoping, period. Hope is exhausting when it has nowhere to go. There were moments when I almost said something, almost reached across the quiet and named what was missing. But every time I imagined his response, it was kind, understanding, and unchanged. And somehow that felt worse than rejection. Because how do you argue with someone who means well? How do you demand more from someone who isn't doing anything wrong? So I kept the ache private. It became background noise in my own life. I noticed how often I felt lonely in his presence, how I would feel lighter when I was alone, because at least then I wasn't waiting. Waiting for what? I didn't even know anymore. I told myself this was adulthood, that passion fades, that depth looks quieter than movies make it seem. But deep down, I knew this wasn't depth. It was distance, dressed up as peace. I wasn't unhappy enough to leave. I wasn't fulfilled enough to stay. So I hovered, half present, half hoping, and slowly, without any dramatic loss, I began to forget what it felt like to be fully wanted. Not tolerated, not accepted, wanted. And that forgetting, that was the first real thing I lost. The realization didn't arrive like a revelation. There was no sentence that landed fully formed in my mind. No moment where the room seemed to stop moving. It came the way most truths do when they've been waiting for you. Softly, without urgency, almost politely. I was standing in the kitchen, nothing special. The light was low, the kind that makes everything look gentler than it is. He was talking about something small, something ordinary, and I remember noticing how my body wasn't leaning toward him anymore. Not away, just still. I wasn't bracing, I wasn't hoping. I wasn't translating his tone or searching his face for meaning. I was simply there. And in that stillness, I felt it. Not pain, not anger, absence. I realized I had stopped waiting, not because I had been fulfilled, but because I had grown tired of expecting. That's when it became clear, not suddenly, but undeniably. I could stay here forever, and nothing would change. Not because he didn't care, but because this was the fullest version of care he knew how to offer. There was a strange peace in that understanding. For the first time, I stopped asking myself what I was doing wrong. Stopped wondering how to phrase things differently. Stopped believing that patience would eventually turn into closeness. I saw the relationship clearly, without hope smoothing the edges, without fear exaggerating the flaws. Just two people, one offering steadiness, the other quietly starving for intimacy. No one at fault, just a mismatch that had learned how to survive. I didn't confront him. I didn't list the things I needed. Not because they weren't real, but because I finally understood they wouldn't land. Not here. That night, lying beside him, I noticed how my sadness felt. Complete. No longer searching for relief. There's a particular kind of grief that comes when you stop negotiating with reality. It's calm, heavy, final. I didn't leave immediately. Leaving takes energy. Clarity takes rest. For a while, I just sat with the truth, let it settle into my bones. I began to imagine a life where I didn't have to minimize myself to maintain peace, where silence wasn't something I had to decode, where my presence invited response, not just tolerance. The idea didn't feel exciting, it felt relieving. When I eventually told him my voice was steady, not rehearsed, not shaking, I didn't accuse, I didn't explain in circles. I said what was true in the simplest way I could, that I felt alone, that I had been lonely for a long time, that it wasn't his fault, He listened, the way he always did. Kind, attentive, still. And in that moment, I knew I was making the right choice. Because even now, even here, I felt myself folding inward to make the moment easier. I left quietly, not with certainty, but with honesty. Afterward, the silence was different. It didn't echo. It held me. I noticed how my breath felt deeper, how my thoughts moved without bumping into expectation. I missed him. Of course I did. You don't grieve someone because they were cruel. You grieve them because they were familiar, because they tried in the only way they knew how. But slowly, I began to feel myself returning. Not the dramatic version, not the fearless one. Just the one who speaks without rehearsing, who reaches without calculating, who expects to be met. And now, when I think about why I stayed as long as I did, I don't judge myself. I stayed because nothing was wrong enough to leave. And I left because nothing was right enough to stay. If you're listening to this and something in your chest feels tight, if you've been telling yourself that quiet pain doesn't count, that absence is something you should be able to tolerate, I won't tell you what to do. I'll only say this: you're not weak for wanting to be held in ways that don't need to be explained. And whatever you choose, please don't disappear gently just to keep the peace. Some silences aren't meant to be survived.